Professor Marcia Hermansen, Professor of Islamic Studies, a leading voice in the American Muslim community. You're in Chicago. Ramadan has begun.
Thank you, Alon, for inviting me to participate in this conversation.
Marcia, your expertise is in history of Islam and its various historical stages and thought. You're engaged. You're a member of the community. I'm wondering, what does the wisdom of your tradition have to say to people as they're struggling with the multiple complexities engendered by COVID-19? I've identified some issues that are worthy of consideration, but maybe we should begin the conversation by asking, from your perspective, from your own situatedness in the community, what do you consider to be the greatest spiritual challenges?
I think the great spiritual challenges, well, let's start off with it being Ramadan, right? So it's always, kind of plus and minus, right? So Ramadan is a time for reflection, for doing extra worship. And even especially during the last 10 days of Ramadan, there's a period called I'tikaf, where people are actually encouraged to go on a spiritual retreat and withdraw from the world altogether. So I think that's an interesting interplay between sort of the intentionality of going on a retreat and the sort of, are you stuck at home? And how you transform being stuck at home into the intentionality of, well, this is a chance for me to really do a retreat and unplug. Because of the lack of community, there are actually, multiple opportunities to plug in. Or go to a seminar or do something online, or so we still want that community and connection. So that might almost work against the retreat mode. So it's kind of back and forth, and I guess it's really centering into. I'm not sure if it's what does God want for me, or where is my soul this Ramadan?
You're speaking for yourself now.
I was speaking in general.
In general. I wasn't certain whose voice. Was this the voice of the community not being sure? Or you're speaking for, I'm Marcia. I'm not yet sure what God wants from you.
Okay. I think I'm Marcia. I'm Marcia. I'm not that interested in all the seminars and things that are going on, except in a sort of sociological way. Like, isn't it intriguing? So one of the things I do is study the community, right? And so there's like how to work out in Ramadan, or how to be productive, which sounds very American Protestant kind of thing. Like how to be productive in Ramadan when you're working from home. So just add that extra, like you can do it, you can do it all. You can work from home, do Ramadan, and be productive. I would love to be able to really do the retreat, because there are, in fact, it's not like you have to cook dinner for multitudes of friends and you have to run around one place or another. Now, of course, one loves to do all those things, right? So we miss it. Yes, we miss. So this is me saying, yes, there's a tension there in missing all those things, but hoping that one can make an opportunity to go more deeply.
So I hear a very interesting tension. On the one hand, Ramadan is like a problem to be overcome. In other words, we still have to be productive. We still have to work. It's one more challenge. Let's get past the challenge. On the other hand, it's a spiritual opportunity, as you described. So there seems to be a very deep tension between the element of one more challenge and the element of a spiritual opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And also the humanity, like we can do it all, there's a terrible pandemic and all life is upended and we can keep going on. And I think there is a spiritual thing in that. I mean, if it is hope and gratitude that we can keep going and be inspired. I mean, it's not that that's necessarily all bad, but again, it is that tension of, well, let go and let God guide us, and perhaps see the beauty in not getting in our cars and going places, but rather, staying, being in our retreat caves of one sort or another.
Are there any standard prescribed elements of the Ramadan retreat or end of Ramadan retreat? Are there any specific classical instructions that can then be transported into the present COVID-19 situation?
Well, I mean, the classical itikaf, or at least now, I'm not sure, I haven't, probed deep. I think you're speaking of like legal injunctions and so on, but
either not even legal, but what kind of orientation, what practices are recommended, what's the best way to pass a retreat, how to use your time in retreat, all those things that there must be a ton of wisdom and that people throughout this period could have used, but especially now during Ramadan can apply.
Well, again, I would say there is the Sufi tradition of retreat, or a chilla, which is filled with a lot of litanies and extra prayers, and one is on one's own, and it's very very sparse, and that is not necessarily done in Ramadan. It's, it traditionally was a 40-day retreat. The way that many Muslims do the itikaf, it's quite flexible, and in a way that's nice, that it is flexible. You don't have to do it all 10 days, or you don't have to do it this way or that way, but a common way that it's done is in the mosque, and then it becomes a male thing. On occasion there are facilities for females to do it, but it generally is, males going to the mosque and spending some days away from their family and spending that time in prayer, but also having a certain fellowship together. So there actually has been some kind of public commentary on, it's going to be different for the men this year because they can't, go off. They have to be in the home. So again, we might have a new thing where the home becomes the space of retreat. So how do you create that separateness or sanctuary or focus within the home environment? So how your home becomes a cave of retreat. And
Any thoughts on that, or any messages you've seen circulating that could be helpful to that cause?
Well, I suppose if one is at home, that one of the messages that's circulating in the community is that often females are in fact maybe not encouraged or not expected to go to that deeper level, because their deepness, I suppose, is the service of cooking the meals and make everything happen behind the scenes. Perhaps this year's Ramadan retreat, if the male or males in the family spend a day doing retreat, perhaps they might accommodate another day when the females could have that experience. So in that sense, if this is the deep, hardcore stuff of your itikaf, because actually itikaf, you make an intention to do it, but it doesn't have to be for a really long period. So then I suppose the challenge would be to get that benefit, in a shorter time, like focus in a shorter time rather than I'm going to go off for 5 days or 7 days and do this.
I hope it's not indelicate to pose the following question, and if it is, we'll take it out of the interview. The one of the advantages of males moving to the mosque environment is it creates a situation where sexual abstinence becomes part of the practice of Ramadan, even though, as far as I know, it's not forbidden to have conjugal relations during Ramadan at night, but de facto, it creates a situation of spiritual intensification by virtue of moving away from the home. So sexual abstinence becomes a part of the spiritual life. What would happen to that once the whole process is moved from the mosque into the home? Is this something that would be, obviously different people will have different answers. What I'm asking you is there a discussion of this? Is this issue being aired out?
Wow. I have not heard a discussion of this, but then of course it is very explicitly permitted in the tradition, because that at night males can have sexual relations, or couples can be together at night in Ramadan, that it was not forbidden. And remember, sex itself, right? There's no monasticism in Islam, so it's not that abstinence necessarily takes you to a higher place, but I suppose in the sense abstinence from everything certainly does improve one's focus in a retreat or in a meditation. So I don't know if there's been any discussion about that. I never really thought of that, but that may be because I'm going from the perspective of a female who doesn't usually get to go spend long periods in the mosque.
I find it extremely valuable to be having this conversation from the perspective of female. So much of what we see in religion is a male perspective. I'm grateful to you for opening us up to that perspective. So let me share with you something interesting that I think you'll find interesting. I spoke a few days ago to the chief rabbi of Russia, and he discussed the fact that for them, religion was moving from the synagogue into the home. A few days prior to that, I'd spoken to the bishop of Assisi, and he was saying to his community around Easter, learn from the Jews who are able to celebrate religion in the home. Mm-hmm. So here you're telling me that practices of Ramadan are shifting from the mosque into the home. So I find that fascinating, which then raises the question for me, where is the central place of religious? Is this shift from mosque to home? Does it change the balance of how religion is practiced? Or to begin with, all along, it was always the shift, and therefore there was always this balance, therefore it's a fairly minor shift?
You mean in the Islamic tradition, there was home and the mosque for religion? Well,
yeah. So the question is, within the overall economy, so the Christian is in trouble. The Christian feels our churches are closed. It's a problem. So learn from the Jews, celebrate in the home. But the Jews also say, well, we're no longer celebrating in the synagogues. We have to adapt to this change in the homes. How much of a shift is it for Muslims to have to move the focus of religious practice to the home?
Yeah, well, I think that shift from the public space or the communal outside space in institutions to the home, I think gender is also a really important part, of that, right? Because women, and I'm almost now thinking of Judaism as, the normative one, right? So the female is the one who lights the Shabbos candles and does all this home worship in Judaism. So she has that role traditionally, but it is very gendered, right? In the Islamic tradition, I think religion, people, of course, do. One can do, the ritual prayers and do the whole earth is a mosque, right? The whole earth is a mosque. So again, it's kind of complex. There's no reason why the home shouldn't fulfill a lot of those functions, and it does. So the issue are the communal prayers, the Friday communal prayers. So there's been a lot of discussion about the Friday communal prayers, but all of the other prayers it's desirable to do them in a mosque for males. But for females, it's kind of a wash, or even in some schools of law, preferred if the female does not go to the mosque. Right, so it is, mosque attendance is gendered. Home, being at home, I suppose, was it sort of happens when the male religious practices are domesticated, and so it's like seeing a whole other side. I think there is going to be a shift in awareness. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but but people are already talking about it.
So you see
What
it
happens
as,
when you stay home?
do you see it as a spiritual opportunity for the community to maybe grow in some way, or at least to give more of a function for women and more equal opportunity?
Well, I think it is a spiritual opportunity, because the sort of deprivation question, like who is being deprived, like if a male, and this was actually, so I have to say, this was published in the Chicago Tribune. I was quite surprised. They usually do an opening of Ramadan piece, and of course it's an opening of Ramadan during the pandemic piece, but it actually ended up with a discussion of gender, and the sort of husband saying, oh, every other Ramadan, as soon as dinner was finished, I would rush off to the mosque to pray, and my wife stayed home and cleaned up, and now I'm at home and I'm expected to participate in the cleaning up. So all of these things were going on behind the scenes that enabled a certain kind of piety. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't families that everybody rushes off to the masjid, but still, it is, if everybody's at home, everybody's kind of in the same space and seeing the same thing. It's kind of a leveling. But could that then be taken to a higher level of elevating the home experience? And doing more things as a family. Do
you have a vision what that could look like, to do more of a Ramadan, and how the meaning of Ramadan could apply itself more to the family?
Well, I mean, definitely Ramadan is a beautiful family time, and family practices are not only focused on eating and enjoying and socializing. They are, I mean, the meal is in a way sacralized in various ways. Certainly the opening of the meal and the taking of the dates and, the thanking God for sustaining us and so on. So I don't want to give the implication that it's not a family spiritual time. It's probably the most family spiritual time, but even that could perhaps be deepened in this situation, because the extra practices through which one draws ever closer to God, according to the tradition, now the extra practices are being done by all together, and probably more in the same space, rather than the women going upstairs and the men being, in a separate place.
What else can you tell us about what Ramadan means and how it's practiced that would be relevant to Muslims and others approaching or addressing COVID-19 more spiritually?
Well, part of the discussion around Ramadan is, sort of why one fasts, and that sort of appreciation. Well, and of course there are different levels, right, to these discourses. So one is, well, you fast and you become aware of the sufferings of the poor or those who have food insecurity. And I think for at least some individuals, and maybe I can speak personally, I mean, there have been times when I felt a kind of, food insecurity. Like, I'm not sure at the beginning. I didn't, know how are you going to get food delivered, or how are you going to manage, or what if there's no halal meat, and then you start thinking about, you realize that there's a different kind, the mind, right? So then I would flip that into almost a contemplative piece that you might say is Sufi, but perhaps some of it is simply New Age or Eastern religion influenced discussions about the human mind and how it jumps around and how it wants to be attached. And I think that is relative to the Ramadan experience, because during Ramadan one does not eat or drink for long hours. And initially you're on automatic pilot, right? I've got to I got to reach for a cup. Where's my coffee? Or I got to make a cup of tea, or I need a snack. And so you realize that food and drinks are kind of drug, right? Punctuating. It's almost like it builds up your ego. It's like a comforting thing that keeps you from going into dark places. You can self-medicate, with a Starbucks or something. And so that kind of blank, well, this is it. And so that emptiness or that deprivation or that break can be, it's very difficult. For example, if one is depressed or down, not having that sort of rhythm of distractions and comfort can really induce a very dark feeling, and it's not about one being spiritual or not spiritual or good or bad. It's just knowing that. So with, I suppose, a spiritual guide or a spiritual practice, it's seeing that dark feeling and seeing that also has to be embraced, right? So there's a kind of psychology to fasting, of being with the emptiness, being with the challenge, and being dumbed down, by the way, for like people who like to talk a lot and read books and write and do intellectual work. Having Ramadan brain, just knowing that, no, I can't do those things right now. So experiencing that. So maybe I can meet the world in a different way. I can be grateful for that. I can be grateful for when I'll be back to not being that way, but I can also love this moment and see what this moment has for me.
So you're doing great for Ramadan Brain. I just want to tell you that. But going back then to COVID-19, so how does all this connect to lessons and approaches to COVID-19?
Okay. Well, COVID-19 is yet a more shocking. I don't know if I should call it profound or shocking. Because it's kind of, it could be profound, but right now it's a shock, and the uncertainty, the instability of really not knowing, maybe not knowing where this is going to be. So again, there's part of it. I think there could be almost a threat of despair, or as one of the questions, but like fear, despair, deprivation. And of course, tradition has spiritual resources. Now, this is a rather dramatic hadith, but let me say it, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, which is, if Judgment Day comes and you're in the middle of planting, like a small tree or a bulb, or but I think in the hadith it's a small tree. If you're in the middle of planting something, keep on doing it. Keep on doing it, which is kind of shocking. I mean, I suppose it's shocking to be talking about Judgment Day, but in terms of the pandemic, but there is that side of, okay, this is really bad, whatever it is, but keep on planting. Which is, I think, very humane and very hopeful.
In other words, so Ramadan helps us to come to terms and to get the orientation that even though we're overpowered, we continue, we try to keep up our normalcy. And that's the same attitude that we need to manage the present COVID-19 crisis, like that?
Well, no, I suppose in that sense I was talking more about COVID-19 and saying, and that's another layer to the fact that Ramadan destabilizes us, right? So on the one hand, we're destabilized, maybe we'll feel down, maybe we'll feel challenged in Ramadan. And then in the background is this, and what's going to happen with this terrible pandemic? the message is keep going. And Ramadan is part of the normalcy. So honestly, when, maybe a month ago, it was like, maybe I won't be able to fast, or maybe it'll make me weak, or it's already so scary. I don't know, that feeling. And then it was, it's Ramadan, and, keep going.
I've got to read to you a passage from, it's part of broader Talmudic literature. This is a text of about 3rd, 4th century. It's not, we don't have an exact date. The figure that's described here. It's a saying of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the founder of Judaism following the destruction of the temple. So we're talking about a 1st century figure. Listen to this text. You'll be blown away by it. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, 1st century, says, if there was a sapling or bulb in your hand, and someone told you Messiah is coming, plant the sapling and then go out to welcome him.
Wow, yeah.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Amazing how in all kinds of surprising ways we come up across these parallels. So you had mentioned a moment ago fear and anxiety. You've seen a lot of that. What medicine has worked for you? What medicine has worked for others? Even, we don't have to remain tied to Ramadan now, though it's always relevant. What medicine have you found helpful?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned, because I think fear and anxiety, and as a college professor, you may know that the sort of new generation, the generation now of kids, anxiety is really, really pervasive. I mean, it's pervasive in the culture, on the whole, but it seems to be getting worse now. That
tell me more. I know I wasn't aware of it. Tell me more about this, so we have a better appreciation.
Oh, yes. Well, a lot of, instructors talk about it, that students today, you may start the semester with 30. I mean, if you're lucky and you're at a school where the classes are capped or so on, let's say you have 30 in the class, you might expect that, 4 or 5 of them are not going to be able to finish the semester because of anxiety.
Always, or now specific to the pandemic?
No, not because of the pandemic. It's been like that for several years. That among young people, there's a kind of epidemic of free-floating anxiety. Like anxiety, that they would diagnose as anxiety disorder. It's unspecific, but it's very crippling. It's very debilitating, and there's. In the Islamic tradition, so some of my friends who, are involved in Islamic spirituality, somebody's sheikh, I don't know who this was, but somebody's sheikh said, doing the ritual practices, the ritual washings very punctiliously, and those aspects of ritual reduces anxiety. And it almost sounded a bit Freudian, right? Freud's theory of kind of OCD and ritual and all. Religion was a human response to anxiety. But I thought about it a bit, and I think having the routine, right, and also maybe the physicality of purification and doing things in a certain order and a certain number of times, something about the human condition that actually having a religion that has those type of elements embedded in it, is a good thing in anxious times. Or just pray. So there was this conversation about what do Muslims do if they can't pray? And I actually heard, I was just beginning to study Islam, and somebody had come to give a lecture, a visiting speaker, to a mixed audience, people from the Muslim community and maybe people from this Canadian city where I lived. And some of the speaker, who was a little bit bombastic, what do Muslims do when they can't pray? and the questioner meant it in terms of like the dark night of the soul, or feeling detached from God, or spiritual struggling. And the Muslim, visiting speaker didn't get that at all. He said, how can you not pray? You wash, you face Mecca, you just pray. I mean, there's nothing to it. And at the time, I actually didn't like that answer. I thought, well, he hadn't heard about Al-Ghazali and the spiritual crisis and not being able, Muslims can have spiritual seeking too. It's not just ritual. But on reflection, and even hearing some of my non-Muslim friends say, it's, there's something great about the fact that no matter what's going on, you can just get up and, go through those motions. So again, there's that dance around intentionality and practice. And there's something to be said for just kind of the practice having its own dynamic, or the ritual having its own dynamic. So that's something in anxious times, if you have a ritual or a routine. And even they are counseling people in the time of COVID that create a routine. You know where I think that came from, though? Like people who've been in solitary confinement, to sort of stay sane and focused, at least create yourself a routine and a schedule and a program. We seem to do well with that. And even on retreats, you usually have a schedule. I'm going to do, 1,000 of this litany, and then I'm going to contemplate, and I'm just going to hang out. Then you tend not to get anywhere.
Great. Loss and deprivation. I think that was another issue you mentioned earlier, and we thought we would want to talk about. So what have been, there's a lot of loss. Loss of employment, financial loss of life. There's loss in all kinds of ways. What perspective can you and your tradition bring to bear on that?
Yeah, I think especially for those, let's say the post-World War II generation, right? The boomers and those after. We've had it pretty easy. In many ways. So this is the crisis, right? And instead of, it's like we had a long breather. That's not, by the way, to diminish. Of course, there's been terrible suffering and crises and wars in other parts of the world. And, we can't get into the politics here, but this sort of, loss and deprivation and tragedy, it's like, do we have what it takes to get through it, right? Have we been tested? Or maybe so I'm a couple of things are coming up for me here. One is the idea of adversity, right? And even as individuals, okay, if we didn't have a generational adversity, I'm sure that many of us have had adversity and things to overcome along the way, maybe all of us. So whatever that personal adversity was, has that shaped us? How have we reacted to that? How have we learned from that we can bring to bear in this time of adversity and loss and deprivation? So some of that is general, right? That's a human thing. That's a psychological thing. In the Islamic tradition, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is of course the model for Muslims. And if one thinks of the struggles that he and his followers had to overcome, and there's actually some really relevant verses in the Quran about that that are alluding or usually taken to refer to that very struggle of the Prophet. He was orphaned, and so there's a chapter of the Quran that is saying you were an orphan, and ultimately you were taken care of. Okay, and you faced all of these things, and God has taken care of you. And when you come out the other side of that, be sure that you always take care of the orphans and that you never turn away the needy person, and that you speak of God's blessing. So gratitude. So I think the lifelong attitude of being grateful to God. And of course, sometimes people almost, it's like, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, no matter what happens. So trying to, and I think it's beyond like, let's find the silver lining and all this. It's more like wherever you turn, there is the face of God. So somehow one is able to see the face of God in this, because after all, everything comes from God. So actually there's a specific verse of the Quran that says you will be tested by fear and hunger and calamity and everything that you worked for, kind of evaporating. And one must cultivate patience and gratitude, because Muslims say, indeed, we come from God and to God we return. So God consciousness.
That really is the key, isn't it? And really, as I do these interviews, at the end of the day, God consciousness is really the broadest common denominator to give us security, to allow us to cope. But you raised a very interesting point, and that is that what we go through should condition us to how we treat the others, which then brings in this element that I think is one of the major things we're seeing through this COVID-19 situation, which is a sense of solidarity, interconnectedness. We got this virus from China. We've got to be showing global solidarity. What is the theoretical foundations for why we should engage in global solidarity, and either human solidarity or maybe even beyond human interspecies solidarity? What are the theoretical, spiritual foundations for that in your tradition?
In the Islamic tradition, of course, everybody is, most concerned about those who are close or near and dear, the most about. But in the Islamic tradition, there is a sense of responsibility and neighborliness and kindness to everything, including the non-human world. So one has a responsibility to do good and to be helpful and just general. I'm always thinking like the random sort of common, looking out for everything. So, for example, blessings upon. I bet you have something like this in Judaism too. Like the person who removes a stone from the road so that nobody will trip over it, or just looking out and being conscious in general.
What's the ideal called? How is it formulated? How is this idea of shall we say universal benevolence, right? That's what you're describing, a kind of universal benevolence.
Universal benevolence and also a sense of responsibility. So your immediate responsibility, however small, fulfill that. Like be part of the whole. Somehow this, I wanted to talk about this hadith, which is it, and I think it relates to this as well, but it kind of relates to the fear question, because at this time, people are concerned about their families. If you have kids, you're concerned about what their future will be. If you have older people in the family, you're concerned about their vulnerability. And I'm reminded of this hadith of the Prophet. You've probably heard of this one, which is the trust in God, but tie your camel. And I wanted to relate that to the idea of responsibility. So yes, trust in God, that's called tawakkul. Be confident that God will take care of everything. But you are supposed to take care of things. So you do your best. It isn't like this blind, there have been a controversy in certain communities, religious communities, where they say, well, I believe in God, so I'm not going to do social distancing. God will take care of me. No, then you're not tying your camel. You do whatever you can do to be safe, to be healthy, to protect vulnerable people. And
So
then
to make certain your camel doesn't run away.
Yeah. But you cannot, you have to acknowledge, that even with your best efforts, you may not be able, but you trust in God, and make your best efforts. You keep making, that's always the tension, right? In religion, in spirituality, right? Yes, God is in charge, let go, let God. God is in charge of everything, but you have to also do a part. And maybe you're doing a part is also the divine, the divine guidance that you're doing that part, but still you must do whatever you can do.
Is there anything else you would want to tell us as spiritual message that's relevant to the broader context, to the context of Ramadan, to the context of the moment? Things that you think your experience and the wisdom of your tradition might wish to illuminate us with?
Well, something I was, one of my Muslim colleagues in a YouTube video was saying, and I'm wondering what you would also think about this, sort of saying, well, as religious people or religious Muslims, we are we have a sense of awe at the divine power, gratitude, patience. So religious people are better prepared to meet this than those who are not religious. And something about that strikes me as a bit ungenerous, that somehow, so this is me or my, yes, those beautiful things are in our tradition. And I think all humans can find those beautiful things. They may not call it God. They may not perform this ritual or that ritual, but there is something of the divine in every human being that needs to be exalted. And of course, I had a Sufi teacher who would say, whoever comes before you, it's like you're greeting the divine, right? So even if that person is not following a particular tradition in this plague, and I'm sure that person is as capable of performing an act of kindness or as capable of finding meaning. So I want to embrace that.
Interesting. In other words, you're ready to let go of all the potential advantages that religion brings in the name of empowering the non-religious?
No, I guess I'm worried about spiritual arrogance. Yes, I have these beautiful things in my tradition and my practice. But I do not want to say that someone else who does not have that is somehow, well, they're not going to be able to cope, or I guess it's a part of me that's very humanistic.
Well, acknowledging and embracing that humanism, what would you still consider to be the added value that religion brings to your life and therefore to this situation?
Well, I'm very grateful for all the aspects of my tradition, from the outer to the inner. So from the doing the rituals and having the expectations and, having all the wonderful teachings of the past. And then the contemplative side, because that's another thing I'd like to point out. I come from a tradition and have been, 20-day retreats where you don't talk to anyone and you just watch your breath or things like that. So, and maybe I'm a bit introverted. So some of these things are like an opportunity to do more. But but I can understand that, everyone has unique gifts and treasures, and any great religious tradition has aspects that can help that person. So the extrovert activist can be, doing webinars and finding ways to connect, and it's coming out of the tradition and enriching, but it's suitable to that person's being. You can't try to make everybody suddenly, love meditation. Now, if somebody wants to try and think, oh, this is an exotic thing, and I don't know anything about it, well, then by all means try it. Maybe you will find something delightful in it. It usually takes a little while to bear fruit, right? That's another thing I'd like to say about this this situation that we're in right now. It's like another tension, right? The tension between kind of discipline and structure and intuition. Because I feel that at times of crisis like this, it's almost like we're very close to other worlds. Sorry, this is maybe going to sound a little, it's like the intuitive function, our intuitions or our insights, or even our connection to this is the global connectivity. So there's actually a Sufi practice during the kind of dawn meditation where one is attuned to great souls or mystics. It's like every great soul that has passed and that has achieved closeness to God, it's like there's a trace there, and one can connect with it. So that capacity or that potentiality is almost at times like this, like ramped up. It's like those who are working for good are trying to collectively push towards that good. Some are doing it through activism, some are doing it through contemplation and prayer and blessing, like the path of the saint, okay? So one within a tradition can try to attune to whichever of those possibilities is the most appealing. And it's there where it's sort of, if you learn to cultivate even a little of your spiritual intuition, you will feel drawn to the place, where you can connect. I guess that's what I was trying to say.
But you said there was a tension during these days between intuition and something else. So what was that tension?
Okay, so the tension is that that part of to get through this struggle want to have the structure. Remember, I was talking about making a schedule and doing things. So I think that's the thing about contemplative or spiritual practice. It's like, yes, you have to repeat the litany 1,000 times, and only after you've repeated the litany 1,000 times, you're in the state where you make the connection. Okay, that's at the spiritual level. In terms of the pandemic, it's like in your daily life or getting through things, you need structure and a plan and a kind of, being on. You have to be on, and I'm sure a lot of people who are managing, parents who are multitasking while their kids working from home while their kids are running around or so on, there's sort of that kind of, I got to hold this together. And at the same time, when you can let go of that, holding it all together, there are these moments of what some would call intuition or grace in the middle of that.
So listen, Marcia, you've been flowing very beautiful now between the stability and the intuition. And I know, is that prayer itself, and you just illustrated this, right? Now with all the beads, and prayer itself is a balance between the stability of structure and the rising of intuition to meet God where true prayer occurs. So prayer and the spiritual life itself is strung on this axis between the structure, and the rise towards intuition. Well, that seems to be an invitation to conclude with a prayer. And already, since you're flowing so beautifully with this move of intuition, maybe I can invite you then to conclude with some prayer that would be along the lines of what we've been sharing.
I think I could do the most basic Islamic thing, which is Fatiha, the first opening chapter of the Quran, because the Fatiha is to open, so it's both an opening and in a way it's a closing. So it's often recited, depending on your sub-tradition. You can say this prayer. For example, somebody might say it at a graveside. Somebody might say it opening a meal. Somebody might say it. So it's like the opening and closing. It's like the opening door and the closing door at the same time. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal ladzina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, owner of the day of judgment. You alone do we worship. You alone do we ask for help. Lead us on the straight path. Path of those who you bless, not the path of those who have gone astray. Amen.
Amen. Marcia Hermansen, many, many thanks. I hope this Ramadan brings to you all the blessings it can, and that through it you can also bring to others many, many blessings. Thank you very much.